Hello, listeners. This is Janine
and Kristen
from Henrico Casa. You are listening to our podcast, Vigilant Voices.
Living life every day.
Hello, listeners.
We are always glad to have you here with us because it's so important that we all know more about the challenges facing children and families in our community to ensure that no child faces continued abuse, neglect, or trauma.
And while we're so glad you're joining us today, you should probably hit pause and go listen to our last episode from earlier this month, because today is kind of a part 2 of that discussion.
Good little plug. But yes, in that last episode, we high level explained the role that we at Henrico Casa, right, which stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates, play within the court system and child welfare system. And we really detailed the many ways that advocates make a difference in children's lives.
Right. Their life now and their future life.
Exactly. And our call to action last episode was to participate in one of our virtual information sessions to learn more about volunteering as an advocate. And participate you did.
Yay.
Thank you. We loved having you join us on those presentations.
We did, and we made careful note of the questions that you asked us during those calls.
And I think that's what we are going to chat through and talk about today, because I think that the questions posed during the information sessions are probably questions that many of you have.
Right. But first, a CASA case story. We have an advocate who's currently serving 2 siblings who I'm going to call Bo and Lee. One is a teenager, one is a toddler. Both have been living with their mother and her significant other. And unfortunately, in that living arrangement, they are witnessing escalating domestic violence. Bo is old enough to understand what's happening. He sees the violence.
Right.
He's been scared for his mom, scared for himself, scared to ask for help, really. And while Lee is too young to understand, the instability of the household is affecting him too in other ways. He doesn't have healthy sleeping and eating patterns, and he's not getting the interactions that he needs for his own development, right?
Yeah. I think we often hear people say that domestic violence or intimate partner violence is between themselves and their partner alone,
right?
And that it doesn't impact the children, but it's just not true.
It's not. Even for the little ones that can't voice it, we see it in their development and their behaviors. They are affected. In this case, the police had to intervene after the boy's mom reported a strangulation incident. And so protective orders were put in place to keep Bo, Lee, and their mom safe. And that's when CASA was appointed.
I can't wait to hear how the story changed when CASA got involved.
Yeah.
But I think this story is leading us into probably one of the most common questions that we get asked from potential volunteers.
Sure.
Which is about safety. Is it safe to be a CASA? Will I be safe in this role?
Right. Which is definitely a common question. And we can 100% understand
Absolutely.
the concern, right? And when I'm asked about safety, there's usually 2 things I respond with. The first is that it's really important to understand that as CASA advocates, we are appointed to the case after whatever that initial incident was.
Right. And that could have been a police visit, Child Protective Services doing an emergency removal, a motion filed in court, right? That's not us.
That's before us. And so we're so grateful for the first responders who are the ones to intervene in those initial, sometimes crisis situations.
Absolutely. I mean, first responders are truly a gift to our community, and we are so grateful for their service to protect citizens, including children.
Yes. And so we serve the children that they first responded to later in the process, if that makes sense. So whatever the issue was, once it goes to court, that's when we get involved.
Right.
And so that initial call, what was maybe an emergency situation, is now over, right? And so the children may now be in foster care. They may be living with a relative. If there was a crime, their parent or caregiver may now be incarcerated or kind of on that track. Whatever that initial incident was, it's been addressed. And so now with CASA's help, everyone is working to move forward.
Right. And so, Kristen, I mean, all that being said, we do explain to potential volunteers that they are not walking into a first responder type situation.
Right.
And that, I think, alone alleviates fears that individuals may have.
Sure, I agree. And really the second thing that I point out when we're asked this is that we talk about safety a lot in advocate training. When there are safety concerns, we recommend that advocates use the buddy system for a visit with the children. Maybe they choose to visit the children in public places like schools. And we talk about a lot of other strategies and tools. So after that training, our advocates feel confident, supported, safe.
Absolutely. So we are always concerned about the safety of the children we serve, but we're just as committed to the safety of our advocates.
Yeah. Okay. So hopefully that answers that question. Another question that frequently comes up is related to, where are the children that we serve?
And I guess in essence, they're asking, okay, where will I be visiting the children, right?
Right. And again, the answer is kind of twofold. One, advocates visit the child wherever the child seems most comfortable. Maybe that's at school over lunch. Maybe that's at a park where they can walk while they talk. Maybe that's at their foster home with their foster mom present because that's who makes them feel at ease. It's totally different for every child in every situation.
Really, it's in my mind, it's less about where the visits take place and more about what we are doing to make it feel safe and comfortable for the child we are serving.
Correct. And, I think that's one way to answer that where question, but maybe the second way to answer that question is rooted more in some of our assumptions or stereotypes about the children and families that CASA serves.
Right.
And the reality is the children we serve are not located in just one part of town.
Right.
Abuse and neglect aren't relegated to a certain zip code or income level or housing status. We serve children throughout the county and really throughout the greater Richmond area because while they may be involved in the Henrico County court system, their kinship caregiver or one of their parents or a foster parent or whoever could live somewhere else.
Yeah. And actually, maybe a little over a year ago, we did a visual mapping of the zip codes for the children that we served. And it really was spread out all over our very large county. There was not really a clear concentration anywhere.
No.
And that goes to show what I always say is that unfortunately child maltreatment and abuse is an equal opportunity destroyer type of issue.
Yeah, so true.
So the third question that comes up a lot is something to the effect of, do I have to wait until I'm retired to do this?
Yeah.
And the answer to that is happily for us a clear and resounding no.
Right. Not to say that retirees don't make great advocates.
Yes.
We love our retirees. They definitely have time and flexibility for the role, right? And we've heard them say things like it's a way to continue applying their professional skills later in life because they're in meetings and they're interacting with all kinds of people. They're reading and writing. And
yeah, it's a way to stay sharp in a sense, but to be connected and fulfilled, right?
Right. That being said, you don't have to wait to be retired to be an advocate. About half of our current advocates are full-time employees or students.
Right.
And so they volunteer as CASA advocates outside of their, quote, day job because it's important to them to serve and to make a difference.
Yeah, they don't want to wait until they're retired. They want to do something now, which is amazing.
And they shouldn't have to wait, right? Especially with the work culture these days. Many people have flexibility in their schedules. Employers often encourage volunteerism and give employees paid time off to volunteer.
And we also see employers with different donation programs or what we call matching programs, where they donate to an organization in support of the time their employee has spent volunteering there.
Yeah, there are so many creative ways employers are supporting community involvement. So if you're working, know that you can most definitely pursue becoming an advocate. The time commitment is typically 10 to 20 hours per month. And that, depends a little bit on the case and what's kind of going on at any given time with your case.
Right. And I think I'd also point out that most of our volunteers who work full time, are able and need, but they're able to create a system or some boundaries, to stay on top of their CASA work, but then balancing life.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
I know some who use lunch hours to make calls as needed. They might carve out a Thursday late afternoon or early evening because that's when they can visit that child, or, a Saturday morning first thing is when they can do a little bit of CASA work, right?
Sure. I think, everyone kind of finds what works for them, right? And scheduling the initial training to become an advocate tends to be the challenge because it's a classroom session, right? And so there's not flexibility. There is a class schedule.
Right, which is important because being present for the discussions that we have and to work through what we call our case study-based training really is what prepares everyone fully for this role.
For sure, because then once the training is complete, the time commitment becomes flexible, right? So it's that initial inflexibility followed by you can then fit it into your schedule, whatever way makes sense to you.
Exactly. And I'm so glad that we have caring community members and listener that includes you that take the time for this, because it makes such a big difference for the children who really need you.
Yeah, it really does. And that's children like Bo and Lee in today's story. When their CASA advocate started visiting with them and their mother, he became concerned for their safety because their mom was looking for ways to circumvent their protective order. And that's scary, right? But this advocate quickly realized that her actions or her behavior with this protective order was in response to her immediate need for transportation and housing. She was focusing her attention on reuniting with her abuser because he had a full-time job and he had the financial means to care for the boys.
Yeah. And, these situations are tough and they kind of break your heart because I think if you step back, you can feel the mother's sort of desperation in this one. She wants the children to be safe, but she knows that they need a roof over their heads. They need food to eat.
Yeah, yeah. Desperation is probably the right word, the only word.
Yeah.
And luckily, this advocate intervened and helped keep the protective order in place. He's helped the mom meet her needs in other ways. He's helped her get additional support and resources from the Department of Social Services, food stamps, bus vouchers, housing assistance. He knew that he needed to help this mom find stability away from her abuser, right, in order to maintain the children's safety.
And I'm so glad he was there for them and able to help them prioritize the children and, in this case, the mother's safety too.
Yeah. And, sometimes I wonder what these children's lives would be like without CASA's intervention. It can be a heartbreaking thought.
It really can be, but it's one that we don't have to dwell on.
Thankfully.
Because children in Henrico County, we're really proud of this, do have CASA. And we just hit the milestone of 30 years of service to Henrico County. And over that time, we have never once turned away a child who was referred to us.
I love that. And I know our whole team is so proud of that. And it's really a testament to the amazing people in this community who step up to serve as advocates. Without people willing to give their time, we wouldn't have this legacy of serving 100% of the children who need us.
Yep. And so by the time this episode airs, our summer information sessions have passed, but there is still always a way for you to learn more about becoming an advocate. So our call to action is to request a recording of our information session. Take a look and learn a little more and see if this role could be right for you.
Right, because there are so many children in our community who need CASA.
And CASA needs you to ensure every single child that needs a CASA gets a CASA.
Thank you for listening to Vigilant Voices, Henrico CASA's new podcast. We have a vision for all children to live in safe, healthy homes. You can help us make that happen. Tell a friend about our podcast and find us on social media.
I believe in the better days.